The Virginia dawn burned against the parade field, painting the ground in long, jagged shadows. Master Sergeant Torrin Blake stood at rigid attention before 300 of the nation's fiercest military hopefuls. His calloused hands betrayed a faint tremor, not from weakness, but from the burden of what this moment carried. At 44, he didn't look like the legend whispered about in after-action reports. He looked like a man who had carried too much for too long, his short, cropped hair already streaked with gray. "Strip him of that uniform," Commander Elias Holt's voice cracked across the humid morning like a rifle shot. "If he can't meet the standard, he doesn't deserve to wear it." A suffocating silence gripped the assembly. 300 sets of eyes followed as two instructors advanced, their faces carved into masks of cold indifference. Blake didn't move. He didn't argue. He had expected this moment ever since stepping onto the compound 3 weeks earlier, armed with nothing more than a medic's pack and credentials that raised suspicion instead of respect. If you've ever been dismissed or underestimated simply because of how you looked, share your experience in the comments. And if stories of grit and resilience speak to you, please consider pressing the thanks button. Your support allows us to keep bringing forward the hidden battles of extraordinary men and women. The instructors gripped his jacket, but just as the fabric slid back, Holt's gaze froze. Beneath the layer of faded cloth, something emerged. A flash of ink etched deep into skin, cut across by scar tissue that told a history no rank insignia could ever capture. His hand shot up, stopping the instructors cold in their tracks. Commander Elias Holt, a man who had spent 2 decades hardening warriors, who had signed off on thousands of brutal evaluations without a flicker of doubt, suddenly looked as if he were staring at a ghost from the past. "Wait." His voice cracked low at first, then sharpened with something close to fear. "That mark? That can't be." 3 weeks earlier, Master Sergeant Torrin Blake had rolled into the Naval Special Warfare Training Center before the sun had risen. His battered pickup truck stuck out among the government-issue vehicles lined along the fence. The young Marine on gate duty had paused when Blake presented his orders. "Temporary medical assignment?" the guard asked, squinting at the paperwork. "Sir, this is a SEAL compound. We've already got combat medics. I go where the orders take me." "Lance Corporal," Blake had answered, his tone carrying the calm certainty of someone who had said those words in far worse places. Inside, he had been directed to Building 7. The first days blurred together, marked by deliberate invisibility. Blake had quietly arranged his corner medical station, sorting supplies with the kind of meticulous precision born from battlefield necessity. The candidates barely noticed him. They were too busy wrestling their own trials, sweating and bleeding under the relentless schedule. It was Petty Officer First Class Miguel Vargas who finally gave voice to the unspoken doubt. Nursing a sprained ankle, he'd studied Blake with a curious frown. "No disrespect, Sergeant," Vargas said carefully, "but aren't you a little seasoned for this kind of posting?" Blake smiled, a faint expression that carried no warmth. "Age brings experience, Petty Officer. Hold still while I wrap this." But Vargas wasn't wrong. Everything about Blake seemed designed to deflect attention. His uniform hung slightly loose. He moved slower than necessary. He kept conversation minimal. When not treating injuries, he could be found in his quarters, scribbling into a small, leather-bound notebook. Lines so compact and cryptic, they looked like symbols instead of words. The real questions began in the second week. Instructor Lena Carver, a veteran with 15 years in the teams, spotted it first during a combat medic refresher drill. Blake was demonstrating a tourniquet application when a candidate asked, "In the field, what if we have to go beyond just bleeding control?" Blake had paused. A shadow flickered across his face, as if memory itself had crept up on him. "Field surgery," he said at last, carefully. "It's a last resort. But if you must..." He lifted a scalpel from the kit. The way he held it wasn't like any medical corpsman Carver had known. His grip was loose, adaptive, a fighter's grip. In his hands, the blade looked just as much a weapon as a tool. "You control the space first," Blake continued evenly, his motions unnervingly fluid, breathing steady, hands steady. "Lives depend on it." The cut he demonstrated on the training dummy was precise, too precise. Carver's instincts screamed. Those weren't just the hands of a healer. Meanwhile, Commander Holt had already flagged the new medic. The orders were clean, signed high enough that pushing back would have been reckless. But documents didn't explain the hardened calluses across Blake's palms. They didn't explain the way he scanned corners before entering a room, or why he always sat with his back to the wall, eyes flicking toward every possible exit. "There's something wrong with our temporary medic," Holt told Lieutenant Commander Nora Quinn during their security briefing. Quinn slid a file across his desk. Background check came back clean, sir. Torrin Blake, 44, enlisted in the Medical Corps 8 years ago. Nothing classified. No redactions. His record's spotless. That's exactly the problem, Holt muttered. Nobody's that clean in our world. Not here. His suspicions deepened when he noticed Blake's ritual. Every day, precisely at 1400 hours, Blake would stop whatever task he was performing and face east. Even mid-conversation, even mid-bandage. His hand would drift toward his left shoulder, an unconscious gesture, like touching a memory carved into the skin. PTSD, Quinn suggested. Happens all the time with medics attached to combat units. But Holt knew better. He had seen every variation of trauma, and this wasn't it. This was deliberate, ceremonial, as if Blake were reliving something. Time to the minute. One afternoon, Gunnery Sergeant Bryce Tanner caught him mid-ritual. Tanner was a blunt wall of muscle, the type who pushed until someone broke. "You lose someone at 1400, Sergeant?" he asked, voice more sharp than sympathetic. "Because you've been staring at nothing for 5 minutes straight." Blake turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "We all lose someone, Gunny. The lucky ones get to choose when to remember them." The remark might have ended there, but Tanner wasn't known for restraint. "Yeah? Well, this is a training facility, not a memorial service. Save it for your own time." Something shifted in Blake then. Subtle but unmistakable. His posture straightened, shoulders squared. For a fleeting instant, the quiet medic looked like a predator. "You're right, Gunnery Sergeant," Blake said softly, though his words carried a steel edge that made Tanner instinctively step back. "This is a training facility. Maybe you should get back to training." The confrontation had been small, but it spread through the instructor ranks like wildfire. The so-called medic had shut down Gunnery Sergeant Bryce Tanner without a raised voice or a single threat. It wasn't bravado. It was the kind of unshakable authority that only came from years of surviving situations where hesitation meant death. That night, Master Sergeant Torrin Blake pulled out his weathered notebook again, only this time he revealed something else as well. A tactical watch unlike anything the supply system issued. Sleek, hardened, and clearly custom-built. The device hummed with encrypted satellite links far beyond normal core hardware. He synced it with his notes in a smooth sequence that spoke of long practice, converting cramped handwriting into streams of digital code. Symbols and coordinates flashed across the screen. Nonsense to anyone else. But Blake studied them with the precision of someone parsing mission-critical intelligence. From his office window, Commander Elias Holt watched, and every suspicion hardened into certainty. No medical NCO from support roles carried tech worth half a year's salary. No one used protocols that specific unless they'd lived in classified shadows. By week 3, the pressure spiked. A field exercise, a staged ambush with paint markers, had been scheduled to test combat medical response. 6 squads fanned out into Virginia's dense woodland while Holt monitored from tactical operations. Blake waited at his small station. Every bandage and vial of morphine arranged with surgical neatness. But nothing inside Naval Special Warfare Training Center ever stayed routine. At 0700 hours, the simulation collapsed into chaos. "Contact left." A voice snapped over the radio, raw with genuine terror. "This is Squad 3! We've got real contact!" "Repeat, actual hostiles!" Holt's stomach dropped. The grounds had been swept hours earlier. The sounds filtering through the comms weren't paintball pops. They were the sharp, concussive cracks of live rounds cutting air at supersonic speed. "All units, this is Holt!" His voice barked, iron hard. Code black, code black. This is no drill. "Take cover and report." Replies tumbled in, all bad. Unknown hostiles, at least a dozen, armed and coordinated. They'd studied the training schedule, waited until the candidates were dispersed and vulnerable, then struck with chilling precision. Casualties mounted. Real blood hit the dirt. "Medical, we need you at grid." The call cut off in static and gunfire. Holt turned to order Blake to hold position until the QRF arrived. But the medic's chair was empty. His supplies remained perfectly laid out, antiseptic bottles glinting in the fluorescent light. But Blake himself was gone. On the live helmet feeds, chaos painted the forest floor. Candidates, though highly trained, were outgunned and pinned beneath suppressive fire. The attackers advanced with military discipline. Flanking, shifting, pressing. This was no random incursion. It was a rehearsed ambush. "Sir," came a strangled voice from Instructor Lena Carver, eyes wide as she tracked one of the feeds. "I've got Blake on visual. You're going to want to see this." Holt switched monitors. What he saw made his chest tighten. Blake was moving through the timberline like a ghost. He'd somehow armed himself with a vest and rifle. Later reports confirmed they were taken from a wounded candidate. But it wasn't the gear that stopped Holt cold. It was the way he moved. He didn't run, he flowed. Between trees, through shadows, each motion explosive, then vanishing stillness. He presented no target longer than a breath. In one moment, he was there. In the next, he dissolved into the forest itself. This wasn't the walk of a support medic. This was something else entirely. This wasn't improvisation. It was the ingrained rhythm of an elite operator, the kind of reflex born from years of shadow missions where hesitation killed. On the feed, Master Sergeant Torrin Blake closed in on a wounded candidate who lay pinned beneath a sniper's scope. The safe choice would have been to wait for covering fire, to coordinate over comms. Instead, Blake did something that made Commander Elias Holt's grip tighten on the desk. He produced nothing more than a medical scalpel, a blade hardly longer than a finger, and melted into the trees. The cameras lost sight of him, but the audio painted its own picture. 3 muffled shots cracked in rapid sequence, each report followed by a choked gurgle. Then Blake's voice, even clinical. Sniper neutralized. Moving to casualty. Lieutenant Commander Nora Quinn inhaled sharply beside. Holt. How in God's name does someone do that with a scalpel? But Holt wasn't focused on the weapon. He was listening to Blake's cadence, the phrasing, the clipped precision of his words. It was Special Operations brevity code, the kind that hadn't been used since a unit everyone swore was long gone. Holt had heard it in classified briefings a decade earlier, in connection with missions that never made official logs. From there, the fight unfolded like a masterclass. Blake orchestrated the chaos with surgical brilliance, eliminating threats, dragging candidates to safety, weaving medical triage into combat maneuvers. He turned panic into order, used the forest itself as his ally. Wherever the mercenaries pressed hardest, Blake appeared like smoke, striking without wasted motion, then dissolving back into cover. One feed caught him materializing behind 2 hostiles flanking a squad of wounded. The first man dropped before he even realized Blake was there, the scalpel sliding between vest and helmet with terrifying precision. The second spun, rifle half raised, but Blake was faster. The blade flashed, severing tendons in 2 deft strokes. The weapon clattered uselessly to the ground as the man screamed. "Stay still," Blake said, almost conversationally, securing the attacker's hands with medical tape from his own kit. "You'll live. 6 months and a surgeon, you'll even use that hand again." It was that casual detachment that chilled Holt to his marrow. Blake had dismantled a combatant with the same tone someone else might use while stocking a pantry. By the time the QRF stormed in, the battle was finished. 12 assailants neutralized, 3 dead, 9 alive but bound, and 15 SEAL candidates injured. Every one of them still breathing, thanks to the man now calmly checking an IV drip. His uniform spattered with blood that wasn't his. "Sergeant Blake," Holt said, keeping his voice carefully measured as he approached. "We need to talk about your background." Blake glanced up, his expression steady, unremarkable eyes betraying nothing. Yet for the first time, Holt saw it, the predator beneath the medic's mask. "The wounded need evacuation." "Commander," Blake replied, diverting effortlessly. "We'll address paperwork when my patients are stable." But Holt's mind was already racing. The movements, the instincts, the protocols Blake had revealed. They all pointed in one direction. One unit. A program everyone believed had been dissolved after a mission. Gone catastrophically wrong 10 years earlier. Task Force 13, the Phoenix program. The aftermath confirmed it. Intelligence traced the attackers to a mercenary, network tied to an international arms, broker under surveillance for years. But the real question, how they had known the exact time and place of a SEAL, a training exercise, and remained unanswered. The question of how the enemy had bypassed multiple layers of perimeter. Security was left for intelligence, specialists to untangle. But one truth was undeniable. Without Master Sergeant Torrin Blake's decisive intervention, the casualties would have been measured in dozens. "I want everything you can dig up on Sergeant Blake." Commander Elias Holt ordered Lieutenant Commander Nora Quinn that night. And not the glossy biography from personnel files. "I want the uncut version. Use whatever channels are necessary." "Sir, that level of access may require clearances we don't have," Quinn replied cautiously. "Then get them!" Holt snapped, his voice edged like steel. "Someone planted a Tier 1 operator in my program under a medical corps facade." and I want to know who signed off. While official channels churned with red tape and encrypted backlogs, Torrin Blake carried on as if nothing unusual had happened. He treated sprains and concussions, filled out endless reports, and walked back to his quarters with the same quiet stride. But everyone else at the compound looked at him differently now. The SEAL candidates spoke in whispers about the medic, who had moved like a predator, through the smoke and chaos, turning the tide with precision no textbook could teach. The instructors kept their distance, respect mingled with unease. But it was Petty Officer First Class Miguel Vargas who finally asked the question, gnawing at everyone. He came under the pretext of a follow-up on a minor wrist injury, but his eyes betrayed the real reason. That wasn't medical training out there, Vargas said flatly, watching Blake unwrap the bandage with calm efficiency. So, what are you really? Blake didn't flinch. Exactly what my papers say, he answered evenly. A core medic doing his job. Yeah? And before this job? For a beat, Blake's hands stilled, the silence stretching taut. Finally, he spoke. Different uniform. Same mission. Keep people breathing. Vargas leaned in, lowering his voice. Those moves, that awareness, that's not something you learn in a classroom. That's fieldcraft. That's ghost in the system kind of training. Is your wrist giving you trouble, Petty Officer? Blake asked, tone cool. If not, I've got a line of patients waiting. But Vargas wasn't done. My cousin was with Marine Raiders. He swore there was a unit that never officially existed. Said they were erased after a classified op went south over a decade ago. Said they had a medic who could take you apart with surgical precision and put you back together just to break you again. Blake's expression didn't shift, but the smallest weight settled in his shoulders. Stories grow with the telling, he said, finishing the wrap and securing the tape. Maybe, Vargas replied. But the way you moved out there felt like truth. Blake handed over the chart, his eyes meeting Vargas's with a steady finality. Your wrist is stable. Light training for a week. Then full clearance. And one more thing. Sometimes the past deserves to stay buried. For everyone's sake. That evening, Commander Holt's secure line rang. The voice that came through carried authority, so absolute that Holt instinctively straightened to attention in his office. Commander Holt, I'm told you've been asking questions about Sergeant Blake. Yes, sir. His actions during the attack were remarkable. But I need clarity. You won't get it, the voice cut in, calm but immovable. Sergeant Blake is operating under special assignment. His paperwork is legitimate. His mission is classified, and your cooperation is not optional. If your concern is safety, understand this. Your people are safer with him on site than they've ever been. Treat him as you would any corpse medic. That's not a suggestion. It's an order. The line clicked dead, leaving Holt staring at the phone, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down harder than before. He'd been in the military long enough to know when curiosity was more dangerous than ignorance. Still, the unease coiled inside him like a live wire. Blake wasn't just a medic. He was something else, something volatile. And Holt had no idea what would set him off. 3 weeks later, the air at the compound hung heavy with Virginia. Humidity as the day of the final evaluation dawned. Official reports about the ambush had been filed away under layers of vague language and closed investigations. But the real tension lived in the silence, in the way Blake was no longer unseen. People avoided his gaze, as if acknowledging what they'd witnessed would drag it back into the light. At 0600, Commander Holt assembled every candidate and every instructor on the training field. The rising sun washed the sky in shades of crimson, casting the compound in a grim glow. His jaw was set, his voice harder than anyone had heard. 3 weeks ago, this facility was breached. 15 of our candidates went down. By rights, some should have died. They didn't, because one person refused to let that happen. In the back row, Master Sergeant Torrin Blake stood among the medics, posture deceptively relaxed but eyes scanning, always alert. He already knew what was coming. Holt had been circling this moment since that call from high command. The Virginia dawn was merciless, sunlight slicing across the training grounds like a judgment. Master Sergeant Torrin Blake stood at rigid attention, every muscle disciplined into stillness. He looked less like a decorated operator and more like a tired mechanic who had worked one too. Many double shifts, dark hair showing threads of gray, scars carved deep into his weathered hands. Strip him of his uniform. Commander Elias Holt's voice cracked across the assembly, sharp enough to silence the restless whispers of 300 candidates. Any man who conceals the truth has no right to wear it. The formation stiffened. The order was legal, but everyone knew it wasn't about regulations. This was about forcing answers out of a ghost. Blake didn't flinch. He had felt this moment pressing closer with every drill. Every night he spent lying awake in his bunk, waiting for the axe to fall. He had arrived 3 weeks earlier with nothing but a duffel bag, a medic's kit, and credentials that seemed too clean, too perfect. "Sergeant Blake," Holt barked. "Front and center." The walk forward stretched endlessly, every boot step echoed by suspicion. Whispers rippled behind him. But Blake kept his gaze steady until he stood 3 feet away from the commander. His salute was textbook perfect. "Your actions during last week's ambush saved lives," Holt said, his voice low but cutting. "But they also revealed abilities that don't align with your record. I went through every channel available, dead ends, walls, files that vanish the moment I request them. So I'll ask you plainly, who are you really?" "I am Master Sergeant Torrin Blake." "Medical Corps," Blake replied firmly, offering his papers. "Your papers," Holt snapped, "are a fabrication. Solid, carefully crafted, but a fiction nonetheless. No medic moves like you did. No support personnel dismantles. Multiple hostiles with nothing but a blade and lives to tell about it." The silence grew heavy, pressing down on the entire formation. Finally, Blake's voice cut through, steady, but old with the weight of things never spoken. "Sometimes, Commander, truths are buried because they need to be. Sometimes ghosts serve the living better when left in the dark." "Not under my command," Holt shot back. "In my unit, no secret survived that could endanger my people." He motioned to 2 senior instructors. "Instructor Lena Carver and Gunnery Sergeant Bryce Tanner. Strip him to PT gear. If he won't explain himself, his scars will." Carver hesitated. "Sir, is that necessary?" "That's an order," Holt said coldly. The instructors advanced. Blake didn't resist. He had rehearsed this moment in his head 1,000 ways, and every path ended in the same revelation. 10 years of shadows were about to burn away. "I'll comply," Blake said quietly. "But once this line is crossed, none of us can go back." "I'll bear that responsibility," Holt replied. The jacket came off first, then the undershirt was up. Gasps tore through the ranks. Blake's torso was a battlefield of its own, scars woven across his skin like a map of survival. Each mark a story of missions that never officially happened. But it wasn't the scars that froze Holt. It was the tattoo, scorched into flesh and partially torn by old wounds. A phoenix rising defiantly from flames, talons clutching a single number, 3. The color drained from Holt's face. "Dear God," someone whispered. "Task Force 13. Every operator present had heard the legends. The unit that didn't exist on paper. The team called in only when failure was not an option. Missions so dark they never left survivors and or witnesses. You're supposed to be dead," Holt said, voice barely audible. "All of you. Operation Blackwater. 10 years ago?" Blake's eyes, hardened by years in the abyss, met his squarely. 13 went in. 5 walked out. The report said 0 because the world couldn't carry the truth.
"Who are you?"
Holt whispered again. But this time the words carried reverence, not accusation. Blake straightened, voice ringing with the authority of a man who had once commanded in shadows. "Lieutenant Colonel Torrin Blake, former executive officer. Task Force 13, serial number..." He rattled off a sequence so classified that Holt's hands trembled as he recognized it. The kind of designation whispered only in the deepest halls of black operations, where secrets were currency and ghosts had rank. The training ground was silent. For the first time, Holt wasn't staring at a candidate. He was staring at a legend that wasn't supposed to exist. The thundering chop of rotor blades shattered the quiet dawn. A matte black helicopter, stripped of insignia, emerged over the tree line and descended onto the parade, square with surgical precision. Its landing skids kissed the concrete, as if the pilot had done it 1,000 times before. The side door swung open, and a tall, commanding figure stepped down. General Cassandra Reed, her uniform immaculate, radiated authority that silenced the assembled ranks before she spoke a single word. 70 years etched her features. Her hair a steel-silver crown that framed eyes sharp enough to unnerve any operator. She walked through the rows of soldiers with a gravity that made people unconsciously step aside, as if history itself was moving between them. When she reached the front, her gaze locked on Torrin Blake with surgical precision. "Hello, Phantom," she said, voice low but cutting through the morning air. "I should have known you wouldn't stay gone forever." "General," Torrin replied, tugging his jacket back into place. I was fine until someone decided to turn my field clinic into a battlefield. Reed's attention shifted to Commander Elias Holt, who had snapped to such rigid attention his spine might have cracked. Commander, Reed's tone sharpened, you've been dabbling in files stamped well above your clearance. Do you even understand what you've unearthed? Ma'am, Holt answered carefully. I was concerned about the security of my facility. Your facility, Reed countered coldly, has been under the protection of one of the deadliest operatives this country ever produced. And you're complaining? Her words could have frozen a furnace. Task Force Sentinel never officially existed. Its missions were so lethal we stopped calculating survival odds. Operators like Blake volunteered knowing the math was against them. They are the reason half a dozen terror plots never reached your evening news. The reason certain regimes shelved their nuclear ambitions without a word. The reason your SEALs train here in safety rather than bleeding out overseas. Her eyes returned to Torin, unblinking. Colonel, I'm reinstating your commission. Effective immediately. Your choices are simple. Active field command or an advisory post. Decide. With respect, General, Torin cut in, his tone firm but haunted. I've killed more people than I can count. 5 years in Sentinel and 5 more trying to bury what we did. These hands have ended more lives than any murderer. You could name all under orders. All for the flag. Necessary? Maybe, but every night I see their faces. Every dawn I wake with the weight of it. His voice grew steadier, carrying across the silent ranks. I became a medic because I needed balance. For every life I destroyed, I wanted to save 10. For every body I left broken, I wanted to heal 20. Not to atone. Not because it was wrong. Because if I didn't, I'd lose what little soul I had left. I'm done being a blade in someone else's hand. Among the formation, Petty Officer First Class Miguel Vargas swallowed hard. The woman who had once bandaged his leg, calm and gentle, was the same phantom who had carved through enemy squads with surgical ferocity. Reconciling those truths felt impossible. General Reed studied Torin Blake for a long, unyielding moment. What is it you're after, Torin? Truly after? Torin Blake glanced at the gathered recruits, young men and women standing stiffly in formation, each eager to enter the same world of shadows that had nearly devoured him whole. His voice was steady when he answered. I want to teach, he said at last. Not just battlefield medicine. The whole spectrum, how to endure when the mission implodes, how to think clearly when violence is the only path forward, how to walk back into civilian life when home feels more foreign than the war zone. He reached into his pack and produced a slate-gray tablet. Not standard issue. Something custom-built, loaded with secure software far beyond ordinary channels. I've been designing this on my own time. A full-spectrum training framework. Not just combat first aid, but integrated special operations doctrine. A curriculum that should have existed years ago, one that might have saved half the operators we buried. His fingers danced over the screen, pulling up files, interactive modules, encrypted archives of classified tactics, immersive simulations modeled on actual black operations, psychological prep guides addressing the moral wounds no one talks about. This is the kind of instruction universities keep, chasing but can't replicate, because they've never carried the weight themselves. Commander Elias Holt finally broke his silence. You're proposing to re-engineer how special operations are trained. I'm talking about keeping them alive, Torin corrected firmly. Every generation walks in thinking they're tougher than the last. But adversaries adapt faster than pride. The missions we pulled off a decade ago, they'd barely qualify as stress tests compared to what's coming. These recruits don't just need strength and tactics, they need a brutal understanding of the cost of service before it consumes them. General Cassandra Reed allowed the faintest smile, the expression softening the iron lines of her face. Still trying to protect everyone, Phantom. Someone has to, Torin replied, his eyes not leaving the recruits. And no one else has my scars. That makes me qualified. General Cassandra Reed turned sharply toward Commander Elias Holt. Commander, I'm assigning Master Sergeant Torin Blake to your facility as senior training advisor. He will operate with full independence in designing and enforcing new protocols. His approach may look unorthodox, even reckless at times, but I assure you, the results will forge operators who can survive scenarios your manuals don't even have the vocabulary for. Holt's throat tightened before he answered. Yes, ma'am. But Reed wasn't finished. Her hand lifted, finger pointing directly at the trio of recruits who had been the loudest skeptics during the earlier exercise, Miguel Vargas among them. You three will be his first official trainees. Consider it an honor. Most who witness what a sentinel operative can do don't live long enough to benefit from the lesson. The roar of rotors filled the air as the helicopter powered up again. Reed stepped close to Torin, her voice dropping low enough for only him to hear. You understand they'll come for you eventually. The ones who slipped away from Ravenfall haven't forgotten. Torin's jaw tightened. I know, but these recruits don't need simulations. They need reality. And when trouble finds me, it'll find me surrounded by the best this country has left. Reed's grip fastened firmly on his shoulder. Her voice edged with something almost maternal. Phantoms don't fade. Torin, stop pretending you can stay in the shadows forever. The helicopter lifted off, drawing every eye skyward as Torin Blake turned back toward the silent formation of 300 recruits, the figure once whispered about in rumors, the Phantom of Task. Force Sentinel stood exposed, scarred but unbroken. Who here wants to learn how to survive the impossible? Hands shot into the air like wildfire, more than he had seen in a decade. A genuine smile tugged at his lips for the first time in years. His mission was no longer to manufacture weapons. His mission was to shape survivors. That night, Torin opened a weathered notebook and wrote across a fresh page. Day 1, the Sentinel Program. Let the awakening begin. The ink was still drying when a knock interrupted. The door creaked open, revealing a young candidate, Private Ethan Morrow. Barely 21, nervous but carrying himself with quiet resolve. Sir, Morrow began hesitantly, I just wanted to thank you for showing us that scars don't have to mean weakness. Torin froze. From beneath the recruit's collar, faint ridges of burn scars were visible, the exact pattern he carried himself. His voice dropped to a whisper. Where did you get those? Morrow's expression hardened. Classified mission Syria 3 years back. The weight of the words struck Torin like a hammer, and in that instant he realized his ghosts were not his alone.